can still see the exact look in my son's eyes, the cool dismissal that slid over his features like a mask dropping into place. "Mom," he said, his voice flat, lacking any of the warmth I'd known my entire life. "You are just an employee here, and honestly, you are getting too old for this pace." Just an employee. Too old. The words echoed in the hollow space that suddenly opened up inside my chest, a cavern carved out by shock and a pain so sharp it stole my breath. That was the moment, the precise, shattering second I understood that $350,000, my entire life's savings, every penny scraped together over decades of careful planning, and the boundless, unconditional love of a mother hadn't been enough. Not nearly enough to buy simple gratitude, let alone loyalty. But before that day, before the locks were changed, and my heart felt like it had been evicted from its own home, there was hope. So much hope. My name is Janet. I am 65 years old now, living here in Boston. It feels like a lifetime ago, but for 15 years, I have been a widow. My husband, Tom, was a good man, steady and kind, the sort of man who made you feel safe just by being in the same room. His passing left a hole in my life, of course, a void that never truly fills, but you learn to live around it. You have to. I poured myself into my work as an elementary school teacher, shaping little minds, finding joy in their discoveries. And I saved. Oh, how I saved. Every paycheck, a portion went straight into my retirement fund. Tom and I had always been careful, planning for a future where we could relax, maybe travel a little, spoil the grandkids we hoped Michael would eventually give us. After Tom was gone, that nest egg became my security blanket, the proof that I could stand on my own 2 feet, that I would be okay. It represented quiet evenings reading by the fire, maybe joining a gardening club, definitely not worrying about the bills. A modest, peaceful future I had earned. Michael, my son, my only child. He was my world after Tom passed. Always ambitious, that one. Even as a boy, he dreamed big. While other kids were playing baseball, Michael was sketching restaurant layouts in his notebooks, talking about menus and ambiance. He had a flair for it, a genuine passion that you could not help but admire. He worked in restaurants all through college and after, learning the ropes, absorbing everything. He had the talent, the drive, the vision, everything but the capital. Starting a restaurant in Boston, a good one, takes serious money. Hearing him talk about his dream, seeing that fire in his eyes, that ache of wanting something so badly. Well, what mother wouldn't want to help make that dream come true? He was 40, a grown man, but to me, he was still my boy, the one I wanted the world for. And then there were the recipes. My recipes. Well, really, they were my grandmother's recipes, passed down to my mother, and then to me. Hearty, comforting food. Sunday pot roast that melted in your mouth, chicken and dumplings that could cure any bad day, apple pie with a crust so flaky it practically floated. Nothing fancy, just honest-to-goodness home cooking, made with love and generations of practice. Our neighbors always angled for an invitation whenever they smelled something simmering on my stove. Friends practically begged me to cater small parties. Those recipes were more than just ingredients and instructions. They were family history, baked into every bite. They were my connection to the women who came before me, a legacy I cherished. Michael grew up on that food. He knew how special it was. So, on Michael's 40th birthday, watching him blow out the candles on a cake I had baked using my grandmother's chocolate recipe, I made a decision. It felt momentous, terrifying, but also right. Deep down, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I waited until the guests had left. The house was quiet, just the two of us surrounded by wrapping paper and the comfortable silence we always shared. I took a deep breath and pulled out the check I had already written, my hand trembling just a little. "Michael," I started, my voice thick with emotion. "I have been thinking about your dream, about the restaurant." He looked up, his expression curious. "I want to help you make it happen," I said, sliding the check across the table. $350,000, my entire retirement fund. It looked like such a simple piece of paper, but it held the weight of my future security. He stared at it, then at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, I cannot accept this. This is everything you have." "I know what it is," I said, covering his hand with mine. "And I believe in you. You can do this, Michael. You have the talent, the passion. And," I added, smiling, "you will have my secret weapons." "Secret weapons?" "Grandma's recipes." I winked. "I will come work with you, in the kitchen. We will make this place feel like home for everyone who walks in." Tears welled up in his eyes then, real tears of gratitude and overwhelming joy. He stood up and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe, burying his face in my shoulder like he used to do when he was a little boy who'd scraped his knee. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked. "Thank you. We will make it amazing. Together." Together. That was the promise. That was the dream we embarked on. And we did build it. We found a perfect spot in the South End, renovated it beautifully. Michael handled the business side, the front of house, charming the customers with his easy smile. I commanded the kitchen. We called it home style. It felt right. The scent of my simmering sauces and baking bread filled the air, drawing people in. Those first few months were a whirlwind of long hours, exhaustion, and pure exhilaration. I poured my heart and soul onto every plate. The lasagna my mother taught me, the clam chowder that had won a local contest years ago, the shepherd's pie Tom used to request every birthday. It was hard work, unpaid work for me, but seeing the smiles on customers' faces, hearing their compliments, watching Michael glow with pride, it felt like enough. We were building his dream together. We were a team. At least, that is what I believed with all my heart. I poured my savings, my recipes, my time, my love into homestyle, trusting completely in the bond between a mother and her son. I had absolutely no idea, not even the slightest inkling, that the very success I was helping to create would become the wedge driven between us, that the foundation of love and sacrifice I had laid would soon crumble beneath my feet, leaving me standing alone in the ruins. I did not realize that success, for some, has a terrible price, and that price, it turned out, was my heart. And for a while, maybe the first 6 months, it truly felt like we were a team. Homestyle took off faster than either of us could have imagined. It was like catching lightning in a bottle. The buzz started almost immediately. Local food bloggers raved about the authenticity, the warmth, the feeling of being welcomed into a family kitchen. 5-star reviews piled up online. People talked about my pot roast like it was a religious experience. My clam chowder became legendary, and the pies? Well, let us just say I could barely keep up with the demand. I was working 14, sometimes 16-hour days, up before dawn to start the prep, kneading dough, simmering stocks, chopping vegetables until my hands ached and my back screamed in protest. Then service, the heat, the noise, the controlled chaos of the kitchen line. I would fall into bed utterly exhausted, every muscle protesting. But my heart would be full. Seeing the dining room packed every night, hearing the laughter spill out onto the sidewalk, watching Michael greet regulars by name, his face alight with success. It felt like every sacrifice was worth it. This was his dream, yes, but it felt like mine too. We were building something real, something with soul. But success, I learned, has a way of changing things, subtly at first, like a tide slowly turning. I started noticing little shifts in Michael. He spent more time schmoozing with investors he was suddenly courting, less time tasting the daily specials or talking with me about the menu. He began suggesting changes, additions that felt off. Dishes that had nothing to do with our family history or the comforting, home-style promise of our name. Foie gras, truffle oil on everything, tiny portions arranged like modern art on oversized plates. "We need to elevate the brand, Mom," he would say, scrolling through glossy food magazines. "Keep things fresh, appeal to a more upscale crowd." I tried to push back gently. "But Michael, people come here for Grandma's recipes, for comfort food. That is our niche." He would wave a dismissive hand. "We can keep some of the old stuff, but we need to evolve. The market demands it." There was a new edge to his voice sometimes, an impatience that pricked at my heart. It felt like he was starting to see my cooking, our heritage, as something quaint, something to eventually move beyond, rather than the foundation it was. I tried to be supportive, to understand the pressures he was under, but a seed of unease began to sprout within me. The real shift, the one that knocked the wind out of me, came about 8 months after we opened. I walked into the restaurant's small office looking for Michael to discuss the produce order, and I found him deep in conversation with a man I did not recognize. He was slick, dressed in an expensive-looking chef's coat, gesturing emphatically as he spoke. Michael looked up, startled, when I entered. "Oh, Mom. This is Chef Antonio Rossi. He is a culinary consultant from New York." "Consultant?" My stomach tightened. Chef Antonio gave me a look that managed to be both condescending and dismissive in a single glance, a quick up-and-down appraisal that made me feel instantly inadequate in my flour-dusted apron. "We are discussing ways to refine the kitchen operations," Michael explained, avoiding my eyes. Refine? I was the one who had set up the entire kitchen, trained the prep cooks, managed inventory, perfected the timing on every single dish. What needed refining? Later that week, the truth came out. Michael called me into the office, closed the door, and told me he had hired Chef Antonio, not as a consultant, as the new executive chef. "He has incredible experience, Mom," Michael said, his voice radiating false enthusiasm. "Michelin-starred restaurants in Manhattan. He can take homestyle to the next level, get us that recognition we deserve." I felt the blood drain from my face. "But I am the chef, Michael. These are my recipes. This is my kitchen," he sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture he always used when he was stressed or trying to avoid conflict. "Of course, Mom, and everyone loves your food, but this is about prestige, about making a bigger splash. Chef Antonio understands the high-end market. You can still help out. Oversee the traditional dishes, maybe." Help out? Oversee? I felt like I had been demoted in my own home. The kitchen I had poured my life savings and my very soul into was being handed over to a stranger. A man who, in our brief meeting, looked at me like I was the hired help. 40 years of cooking experience, generations of treasured family recipes, dismissed in favor of a fancy resume from New York. The hurt was physical, a dull ache spreading through my chest. I tried. Lord knows, I tried to make it work. I swallowed my pride, bit back the hurt, and attempted to collaborate with Chef Antonio. But it was impossible. He treated me not like the owner's mother or the originator of the restaurant's success, but like some doddering old woman who accidentally wandered into his sophisticated domain. He criticized my techniques, calling them rustic, with a sneer. He changed my recipes, adding foams and gels and microgreens until they were unrecognizable shadows of their former selves. "This is a high-caliber establishment, Janet, not some roadside diner," he snapped at me one afternoon when I questioned his decision to replace my classic apple pie with a deconstructed apple foam with cinnamon air. He constantly undermined me in front of the kitchen staff I had hired and trained, rolling his eyes when I offered a suggestion, loudly correcting my plating. The atmosphere in the kitchen turned cold, tense. The joy I had felt was replaced by a constant knot of anxiety in my stomach. Michael seemed oblivious, or perhaps he chose to be. He was caught up in the glow of positive press chef Antonio's hiring initially generated. The articles praising Homestyle's bold new direction. He brushed off my concerns. "You just need to give him a chance, Mom. He is brilliant. This is good for business." Good for business. That phrase started to feel like a knife twisting in my gut. Was that all that mattered now? Had he completely forgotten the why behind his dream? Forgotten the legacy we were supposed to be building together? The breaking point came one late evening. Service was over. Most of the staff had gone home. I was tidying up my station, feeling weary down to my bones, when I overheard voices from the office. Michael and Antonio. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but Antonio's voice carried, sharp and insistent. "She is holding us back, Michael. Seriously. Her presence. It screams old folks' home cafeteria, not fine dining. These folksy down-home dishes, they do not align with the brand we are cultivating. You need to cut the cord. For the good of the restaurant." There was a pause, and my heart hammered against my ribs. I prayed Michael would defend me, would stand up for his own mother, for the recipes that built his success. But his reply was weak, hesitant. "She is my mother, Antonio. And this is your business." Antonio cut him off. "Do you want a successful, acclaimed restaurant, or do you want to run a charity case for your mom? Times change. You need to evolve or die." I could not listen anymore. I stumbled out of the kitchen, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. I confronted Michael the next morning. I told him what I had heard. I asked him how he could stand there and let that man speak about me that way. He looked uncomfortable, shifted his weight. "Mom, you are taking it too personally. Antonio is just direct. He is passionate about the vision, and maybe he has a point. Times are changing. We need to focus on the future, on growth. No defense, no apology, just dismissal." The casual cruelty of his agreement with Antonio's assessment that I was outdated, a liability, struck me harder than any outright anger could have. In his eyes, I was no longer his partner, his mother who had sacrificed everything. I was just in the way. That night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the old, leather-bound journal where my grandmother had first written down her recipes in elegant, spidery script. Over the years, my mother had added her notes in the margins, and I had tucked in my own variations, stained with vanilla and butter over time. It felt like holding history in my hands. With a heavy heart, I began to meticulously copy every single recipe into a new, sturdy notebook. My pot roast, the chowder, the dumplings, the pies, the Sunday gravy, the cookies my own children had grown up loving. Every measurement, every instruction, every little secret my grandmother had whispered to me as a child. I did not know exactly why I was doing it. Not then. Maybe it was an act of defiance. Maybe it was a way to reclaim something that felt like it was being stolen from me. Maybe I just needed to hold on to the only part of Homestyle that still felt truly mine. I wrote until my fingers cramped, carefully preserving the legacy that my son seemed so eager to discard. I didn't know it then, but that simple act, driven by hurt and a primal need to protect my heritage, would become my life raft. That notebook, filled with the ghosts of my grandmother's kitchen and the scent of my own memories, was the only thing of real value I would eventually carry out of the restaurant we built together. If you have ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to feel pushed aside or taken for granted by the very people you did it for, well, maybe you understand a little bit of how I felt that night. Sometimes, sharing these stories, knowing you are not alone in that feeling, is the first step toward finding your way back. Let me know in the comments if you have ever felt that sting of being undervalued. It helps to know we are not invisible. The tension in the kitchen became unbearable over the next few weeks. Chef Antonio swaggered around like he owned the place, which, in a way, I suppose he felt he did. He barely acknowledged my presence, except to issue curt orders or find fault. Michael continued to avoid any real conversation with me, offering placating smiles and empty assurances whenever I tried to voice my concerns about the direction the menu was taking, about the cold, corporate feel that was creeping into our once warm space. The laughter from the dining room seemed more subdued, the energy different. Or maybe that was just me, viewing everything through the lens of my own unhappiness. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, rattling chains that no one else could hear. Still, I showed up every day, force of habit, maybe. Or perhaps a stubborn refusal to be completely erased from the place I had poured my life into. Then came that Monday morning. It started like any other workday. I woke before the sun, the familiar aches settling into my bones as I got ready. I drove the usual route, parked in my usual spot behind the restaurant. I walked up to the back entrance, the heavy steel door I had opened thousands of times, and slid my key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. I frowned, jiggling it slightly. Maybe it was stuck. It happened sometimes, especially in the cold. I tried again, applying a little more pressure. Nothing. The lock felt solid, resistant, utterly final. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, began to seep into my veins, prickling along my skin. This wasn't a stuck lock. I knew it, instinctively. This was deliberate. My hands started to shake as I fumbled for my phone. I dialed Michael's number, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. He answered on the third ring, his voice sounding distant, preoccupied. "Mom, what is up? I am in a meeting."
"Michael,"
I struggled to keep my voice steady.
"my key, it is not working. I cannot get into the kitchen."
There was a pause, a silence that stretched for an eternity, filled only by the frantic thumping in my own chest. Then he sighed, a weary, impatient sound that cut me deeper than any anger could have.
"Yeah, about that, Mom."
He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt the last vestiges of my hope crumble. "Look, we talked about this. Sort of. Things are changing. We need to streamline, professionalize." Professionalize? The word felt like ash in my mouth. "Michael, what are you saying?"
"Antonio needs full control of the kitchen,"
he said, his voice gaining a brittle, forced confidence.
"No confusion about who is in charge. And, well, the pace is intense back there. It is a young person's game."
There it was. The unspoken words, the hints, the dismissive glances, all coalescing into this single, brutal moment. "So you changed the locks?" I whispered, leaning against the cold steel door for support, the phone suddenly feeling impossibly heavy in my hand.
"We needed a clean break,"
he said, the corporate jargon sounding alien and cruel coming from my own son. Then came the words, the ones I'd heard echoing in my memory ever since. The final, devastating blow. "Mom, we need to be professional about this. You are just an employee here, and honestly," his voice dropped slightly, as if confiding a difficult truth, "you are getting too old for this pace."
"Just an employee. Too old."
The world tilted. I felt dizzy, nauseous. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. $350,000 of my retirement savings. Countless 16-hour days. My grandmother's legacy, entrusted to him. My love, my support, my belief in him, all of it dismissed. Reduced to just an employee who was now disposable, past her expiration date. Michael, I started, but my voice broke. I could not form the words. What was there to say?
I will have accounting figure out your final paycheck, he continued, briskly now, wanting the unpleasantness over with. It is better this way, Mom, really, for the restaurant.
He disconnected the call before I could respond, leaving me standing there in the chilly morning air, staring at the unyielding metal door, the useless key still clutched in my trembling hand. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic, utterly indifferent to the wreckage of my world. I felt a profound sense of unreality, as if I were watching this happen to someone else, a character in a sad, pathetic movie. But the pain blossoming in my chest, sharp and suffocating, was undeniably real. It felt like my heart was physically breaking apart. I do not remember driving home. Somehow, I must have navigated the streets, parked the car, walked up to my own front door, where my key, blessedly, still worked. I stumbled inside, the familiar surroundings of my small apartment feeling alien, distant. I sank onto the sofa, the full weight of what had happened crashing down on me. $350,000 gone. My purpose, the place I poured my energy into every single day, gone. The dream I shared with my son, shattered. And the relationship itself, tarnished, perhaps irreparably. He had chosen ambition, prestige, a slick New York chef over his own mother, over family, over everything I thought we stood for. The tears finally came then, hot and unstoppable. Not delicate weeping tears, but great, racking sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the money, yes, the security I had worked my whole life for, thrown away on a dream that had turned into a nightmare. I cried for the betrayal, the casual cruelty of his words. I cried for my foolishness, for trusting so completely, for believing that maternal love was enough to guarantee decency, let alone gratitude. I cried for the aching loneliness that settled over me, heavier than any grief I had felt since Tom died. I must have cried for hours. Eventually, utterly spent, I reached for the phone and called Sarah. My best friend since college, my rock, the one person who had seen me through every up and down life had thrown my way. Hearing her warm, no-nonsense voice on the other end was like finding a lifeline. Janet, what is wrong? You sound awful. Through choked sobs, I told her everything. The locked door, the phone call, Michael's words. He said I was just an employee, too old. I repeated, the words still tasting like poison. Sarah was silent for a moment, absorbing it all. Then, her voice tight with controlled fury, she said, That ungrateful little... Janet, I am coming over. Right now. Put the kettle on. Sarah arrived like a force of nature, enveloping me in a hug that felt both fierce and comforting. She listened patiently as I went over the story again, her expression hardening with every detail. She did not offer platitudes or easy answers. She just let me pour out my hurt, my anger, my confusion. He cannot do this, Janet, she said finally, her eyes flashing. Legally, morally, this is wrong on every level. That money was practically an investment, not a gift. You built that place with him. Those are your recipes making him rich. What can I do, Sarah? I asked, feeling utterly helpless. Sue my own son? Drag our family through the mud? I don't have the money for lawyers anymore anyway. He has it all. There has to be something, she insisted. You cannot just let him get away with treating you like garbage. That night, long after Sarah had gone home, leaving me with stern instructions to eat something and try to sleep, I sat alone in the quiet darkness of my living room. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying Michael's words, picturing Chef Antonio's smug face, feeling the phantom weight of the useless key in my hand. Despair washed over me again, cold and bleak. Was this it? Was this how my story ended? A foolish old woman, cast aside, left with nothing? My eyes fell on the new notebook lying on the coffee table, the one filled with my carefully copied recipes. I picked it up, tracing the familiar titles with my finger. Grandma's Sunday pot roast, Mama's chicken and dumplings, Tom's favorite apple pie. These weren't just lists of ingredients, they were stories. They were heritage. They were proof of love passed down through generations. They were the heart and soul of homestyle, the very thing Michael was now so eager to discard in favor of foams and airs. And then a thought flickered in the darkness. Small at first, almost hesitant. Antonio had dismissed my food as folksy, down home. Michael thought I was too old, stuck in the past. They saw my cooking, my traditions, as a weakness, a liability. But what if they were wrong? What if the very things they scorned, the authenticity, the history, the love baked into every bite, were actually my greatest strength? What if people still craved that connection, that comfort, more than they craved fancy plating and pretentious ingredients? I looked at the notebook again, not as a reminder of what I had lost, but as something else entirely. A tool, a weapon, perhaps, of a different kind. I did not need a fancy restaurant with investors and slick chefs to share this food, this legacy, with the world. I did not need Michael's permission or approval. These recipes were mine, my inheritance, my identity. An idea began to form, hazy at first, then slowly coming into focus. It was audacious. It was terrifying. It would mean starting over from scratch, with almost nothing. But suddenly, for the first time since that morning, I felt something other than despair. A tiny spark of defiance, a flicker of resolve. Maybe this was not the end. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. I did not need a huge, fancy restaurant built on someone else's ambition. I just needed courage. Courage to stand up for myself, for my heritage, for the value of what I knew deep in my bones was good and true. And somehow, staring at the pages filled with my grandmother's handwriting, I started to feel like I might just find that courage buried deep within the pain. Finding that spark of resolve was one thing. Fanning it into an actual flame was another matter entirely. The practical realities crashed down hard in the days that followed. I had virtually no money left. The $350,000 was gone, sunk into Michael's dream, now his exclusively. My meager teacher's pension was barely enough to cover my rent and basic living expenses. Starting any kind of food business, even a small one, required capital I simply did not possess. Doubt gnawed at me constantly. Was I crazy? Was Sarah right? Should I be looking for lawyers instead of storefronts? But every time I drove past Homestyle, which I tried desperately to avoid, but sometimes couldn't help doing, I'd see the sleek new signage Michael had put up. The valet parking stand out front. Maybe catch a glimpse of Chef Antonio gesturing imperiously through the window, and the image of Michael's face, his dismissive words. Just an employee, too old, would flash in my mind, hardening my resolve. This wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about dignity. It was about refusing to be erased. I started small, ridiculously small. Using the last crumbs of my savings and a small personal loan Sarah insisted on giving me. Consider it an investment in good taste, Janet, she'd said firmly, refusing to take no for an answer. I began exploring options. Renting a proper restaurant space was out of the question, but then, almost by chance, I stumbled upon it. A tiny, slightly dilapidated former flower shop directly across the street from Homestyle. The location felt like fate. A cosmic joke, perhaps, but also undeniably strategic. It was small. Barely room for a counter, a few stools, and a minuscule kitchen in the back. The rent was, thankfully, manageable. It needed a ton of work, peeling paint, questionable plumbing, floors that sloped alarmingly in one corner. But standing inside, looking out the dusty front window directly at the imposing facade of Michael's restaurant, I felt a surge of defiant energy. This would be it. When I signed the lease, using Sarah's loan for the deposit, I felt a terrifying mix of exhilaration and sheer panic. What had I done? Could I possibly make this work? Michael found out about my plan soon enough. The neighborhood wasn't that big. He showed up one afternoon while I was scrubbing grime off the windows, looking utterly incredulous. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, gesturing around the tiny, sad-looking space. "What are you doing?" "I am opening a little place," I said, trying to keep my voice even, refusing to let him see how nervous I really felt. "Just simple, home-cooked food." He actually laughed. Not a kind laugh, but one filled with condescending disbelief. "Here? Directly across the street? Mom, be serious. You cannot possibly compete with us." He gestured towards Homestyle, its polished exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. "We have Antonio Rossi, we have ambiance, we have a wine list curated by a sommelier. What do you have? A hot plate and some old family recipes?" His words stung, cutting right to my deepest insecurities. For a moment, I faltered. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was a fool's errand, born of pride and hurt. But then I thought of my grandmother, of the love and history baked into those recipes, of the customers who used to tell me my food reminded them of their own childhoods. "I have something you seem to have forgotten, Michael," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I have authenticity. I have heart. And yes, I have Grandma's recipes. We will see what people prefer." He just shook his head, a pitying look on his face that infuriated me more than outright anger would have. "You are making a huge mistake, Mom. This is going to fail. You should just enjoy your retirement." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing amidst the dust and decay, his dismissal hanging heavy in the air. His lack of faith, his certainty that I would fail, paradoxically fueled my determination. The next few weeks were a blur of relentless hard work and crippling self-doubt. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, convinced I was throwing away Sarah's money, destined for humiliation. The physical labor was grueling, painting walls, scrubbing floors, haggling for used kitchen equipment I could barely afford. My body ached in ways it hadn't since the early days of opening Homestyle. But this time, there was no shared dream to cushion the exhaustion, only the stark reality of my own precarious situation. Sarah was my saving grace, showing up after her own workday with paint rollers, sandwiches, and unwavering moral support. "Ignore him, Janet," she'd say fiercely as we scraped old wallpaper. "He is scared. That is why he is lashing out." I decided to call my little place simply Janet's Place. No frills, no fancy concepts, just me. I focused entirely on the food I knew best, the dishes that had built Homestyle's initial success before Antonio's arrival. Pot roast, slow simmered and fork tender. Creamy mac and cheese with a crispy breadcrumb topping. Chicken pot pie with a flaky all-butter crust. Thick slices of my signature meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Simple, honest food made with good ingredients and generations of love. I set the prices to be affordable, accessible. This wouldn't be about fancy dining. It would be about feeding people, comforting them, welcoming them. My marketing plan was rudimentary at best. Sarah helped me design simple flyers on her computer, featuring a warm, slightly faded photo of my grandmother standing proudly in her kitchen. We printed them out at the local library. The tagline read, "Janet's Place. Taste the love. Real food. Real simple." We walked the neighborhood, tucking them into mailboxes, pinning them onto community bulletin boards, handing them out to people on the street. I felt self-conscious, exposed, like I was begging for scraps. Would anyone even notice? Would anyone care? The night before opening day was perhaps the lowest point. Standing alone in the tiny shop, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the lingering scent of cleaning supplies, I was overwhelmed by fear. The space felt too small, the equipment too old, my savings non-existent. Across the street, home style glowed, warm light spilling from its large windows, the sound of clinking glasses and sophisticated chatter faintly audible. It looked like a fortress of success, mocking my meager efforts. What if Michael was right? What if nobody came? What if this truly was just a pathetic final act of defiance before fading into obscurity? The loneliness felt immense, a crushing weight. I missed Tom terribly in that moment. I missed the feeling of partnership I thought I'd had with Michael. I felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. I almost didn't open the door the next morning. I stood there, hand hovering over the simple latch, heart pounding, convinced this was all a terrible, prideful mistake. But then I thought about Michael's dismissal. Too old. I thought about Antonio's sneer. Roadside diner. I thought about my grandmother's legacy, entrusted to me. And I thought about Sarah's unwavering faith. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I turned the lock and opened the door. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't a huge crowd, not like the opening of Homestyle, but there was a line, a small line, maybe 10 or 12 people, waiting patiently on the sidewalk. Mrs. Peterson, one of my most loyal regulars from the early days at Homestyle, stood right at the front, beaming at me. Next to her were some of my old neighbors, a couple of the parents from my teaching days, and even a few familiar faces I recognized as former Homestyle customers who had stopped coming after the menu changed. They weren't there for sleek ambiance or Michelin star pretensions. They were there for me, for my food, for the connection we had shared. As Mrs. Peterson stepped inside, giving my hand a warm squeeze, she whispered, "We missed your cooking, dearie. We missed you." It wasn't a floodgate opening, not a dramatic movie moment triumph. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the first trickle of hope, the confirmation that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely crazy. Maybe authenticity did matter. Maybe my old family recipes still held power. The fight was far from over, the future still deeply uncertain. But as I ladled out the first bowl of my steaming clam chowder, I felt a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated the power of home cooking. And maybe, just maybe, they were about to find that out. That first day set the tone. Janet's Place didn't explode overnight, but it grew, steadily and surely, fueled by word of mouth and the undeniable appeal of genuine comfort food served with warmth and care. People came for the pot roast, stayed for the conversation, and came back because it felt like coming home. Unlike the increasingly formal and expensive atmosphere across the street, my little place was bustling, noisy, and friendly. Strangers chatted between the few small tables. Regulars lingered over coffee, and the smell of baking pies and simmering stew created an atmosphere of cozy welcome that no amount of truffle oil or minimalist decor could replicate. I worked harder than ever, but it was a different kind of exhaustion. It was the satisfying ache of building something that was truly mine, on my own terms. Sarah helped out on weekends, bussing tables and charming customers, her belief in me a constant source of strength. Mrs. Peterson became my unofficial ambassador, telling everyone she knew about the real home cooking just across the street from that pretentious place. Slowly but surely, I started seeing more and more familiar faces crossing the road. Former home-style patrons who drifted over, drawn by the promise of the food they originally loved. They'd whisper things like, "It's just not the same over there anymore," or, "Antonio's food is fancy, but yours warms the soul, Janet." Each comment was a small vindication, a balm to the wounds Michael's rejection had inflicted. I wasn't just serving food. I was serving memories. I'd tell stories about my grandmother as I dished up her chicken and dumplings, explain how Tom always requested the shepherd's pie for his birthday. People responded to that. They shared their own stories, their own memories evoked by the familiar tastes and smells. My tiny restaurant became more than just an eatery. It became a community hub, a place built on shared nostalgia and simple human connection. The contrast with home style, which seemed to grow colder and more impersonal under Antonio's reign, became increasingly stark. I heard whispers. Reservations were down, reviews were becoming mixed, complaining about high prices and small portions, mentioning a lack of warmth. The turning point, the moment I knew things were irrevocably shifting, happened about 3 months after I opened. It was a busy Friday night at Janet's place. Every seat was taken. People were waiting happily on the sidewalk for takeout orders, and the tiny kitchen was humming with controlled chaos. I looked up from plating a slice of apple pie and saw Michael standing in the doorway. He looked diminished. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a visible weariness. His expensive suit seemed ill-fitting, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't looking at the crowd or the food. He was watching me, his expression unreadable but tinged with something that looked remarkably like desperation. He didn't come in. He just stood there for a long moment, taking in the scene. The happy chatter, the steaming plates of familiar food, the easy camaraderie. Then turned and walked slowly back across the street to his own, noticeably quieter restaurant. Seeing him like that didn't bring me the vindictive pleasure I might have expected. Instead, I felt a pang of sadness, a flicker of the old maternal instinct. A week later, he appeared again, this time after I had closed up for the night. I was wiping down the counter, exhausted but content, when he knocked softly on the glass door. I hesitated for a moment, then unlocked it and let him in. The silence hung heavy between us, filled only by the hum of the small refrigerator.
"We need to talk, Mom,"
he said finally, his voice low, devoid of its usual arrogance. He looked around the small space, his eyes lingering on the simple, handwritten menus, the mismatched chairs, the photos of our family tucked onto a shelf behind the counter. "All right, Michael," I said, leaning back against the counter, folding my arms. I felt strangely calm, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in months. I was no longer the desperate, heartbroken woman pleading for recognition. I was the owner of a thriving business, standing in my own space. He took a deep breath.
"Things aren't great at Homestyle."
It was clearly difficult for him to admit.
"Antonio's changes. They haven't gone over well. Costs are through the roof. Reservations are way down. The investors are getting nervous."
He paused, running a hand through his hair in that old, familiar gesture.
"People keep saying they miss your food, Mom. They say it doesn't feel like home anymore."
I didn't say anything, just waited, letting the weight of his confession settle in the small space.
"I see what you have done here,"
he continued, gesturing vaguely around the room.
"It's packed. Every night. People look happy."
He finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know, vulnerable and uncertain. I messed up, Mom. I know I did. This was the moment I had imagined, perhaps even craved, during those first dark weeks. The moment of his downfall, his apology. But standing here now, seeing the genuine regret etched on his face, the victory felt hollow. Hurting him wouldn't undo the pain he had caused me, nor would it restore my lost savings or erase the sting of his words. Michael, I said, my voice softer than I expected. I didn't open this place to punish you. I opened it because I had to. Because you made me feel like I was worthless, like my entire life's work, our family's history, meant nothing. You threw away my savings, yes, but you also threw away my dignity. I needed to prove to myself, more than anyone else, that I still had value, that my food, my heritage, mattered. He flinched at my words, the truth hitting home. I was so caught up in it all, he mumbled, looking down at his expensive shoes. The ambition, the money, the idea of being a big-shot restaurateur. I listened to people like Antonio telling me what I needed to do to be successful. I thought that was what mattered most. He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. I forgot what actually made us successful in the first place. I forgot about family. I forgot about you. I am so sorry, Mom. Truly, deeply sorry. The apology felt real, hard-won and stripped of pretense. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness wasn't about him deserving it. It was about me letting go of the bitterness that had taken root in my heart. We didn't merge the restaurants. Homestyle, under its new identity, had failed. Michael ended up selling it, using the proceeds, significantly less than he had hoped, but enough to pay back every single penny of the $350-some thousand he owed me. It wasn't about the money anymore, not really, but the gesture mattered. It was an acknowledgement of the debt, both financial and moral. Instead of reclaiming his old position, Michael came to work for me, humbly. He started by washing dishes, prepping vegetables, learning the rhythms of my kitchen, the real kitchen, built on efficiency and love, not ego. Slowly, he earned back my trust, not just as a son, but as a colleague. We expanded Janet's place into the adjacent storefront when it became available, keeping the same cozy atmosphere but adding more seating. We renamed it Janet and Michael's Place. It felt right, a testament to second chances, to rebuilding bridges. Chef Antonio, I heard, went back to New York, leaving a trail of disgruntled investors behind him. Now, Janet and Michael's Place is a fixture in the neighborhood, known for its consistently delicious food and its welcoming vibe. Michael runs the front of the house, his old charm returned but tempered now with humility and a genuine appreciation for the customers and the heritage we serve. I still command the kitchen, though I let Michael handle more of the business side these days. On weekends, we host cooking classes, sharing Grandma's recipes and the stories behind them, with a new generation eager to connect with the past, to put love back onto the dinner table. Looking back, that painful betrayal, the loss of my savings, the feeling of being cast aside. It was devastating, but it also forced me to dig deep and find a strength I never knew I possessed. It taught me that my worth isn't tied to my age or to someone else's definition of success. It's tied to my skills, my heritage, my resilience, and the love I put into the world. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And sometimes, the path to forgiveness, for others and for ourselves, starts with reclaiming your own value, refusing to be anything less than who you are. You just have to be brave enough to open that door, even when you're terrified of what might or might not be waiting on the other side. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means the world to share it. If anything I've said resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or had to fight for your own worth, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories of resilience and finding your way back. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it meaningful, and please share your own experiences in the comments below. Connecting with each other is how we build strength. Check out some of the other stories on the channel too. I hope to see you again next time. Take care.